In the small town of Pineville, everyone knew each other. The town was quiet, with tall trees lining the streets and birds singing in the morning. It was a place where nothing much ever happened. But one day, something strange did happen, and it all started with an old photograph. Mr. Thompson was an old man who lived alone in a small house at the end of Maple Street. He was a kind man who always smiled and waved at everyone. He had lived in Pineville all his life. His wife, Mrs. Thompson, had passed away 5 years ago. Since then, he spent most of his time tending to his garden and reading books. One sunny morning, Mr. Thompson decided to clean his attic. The attic was dusty and filled with boxes of old things. As he moved some boxes around, he found an old photo album. He took the album downstairs, sat on his favorite chair, and began to look through it. The album was filled with black and white photos from the past. There were photos of his parents, his childhood, and his wedding. Each photo brought back memories. Then, he found a photograph that he had never seen before. It was a picture of a boy standing in front of a large tree. The boy looked familiar, but Mr. Thompson couldn't remember who he was. On the back of the photo, there was a date, July 14, 1960. Curious about the photo, Mr. Thompson decided to ask his neighbors if they knew anything about it. He first went to Mrs. Green, who lived next door. Mrs. Green was the oldest person in Pineville and knew a lot about the town's history. "Good morning, Mrs. Green," Mr. Thompson said, showing her the photograph. "Do you know who this boy is?" Mrs. Green put on her glasses and looked at the photo. She thought for a moment and then said, "I'm not sure, but the tree in the background looks like the old oak tree that used to be in the town square." Mr. Thompson thanked Mrs. Green and decided to visit the town square. The old oak tree was no longer there, but he thought that maybe someone else in town would remember the boy in the photograph. At the town square, he met Mr. Parker, the town historian. Mr. Parker loved collecting stories and photographs about Pineville. Mr. Thompson showed him the photograph and asked if he knew anything about it. Mr. Parker looked at the photo and said, "This is interesting. I don't remember seeing this photo before. But I think I have an old map of Pineville from 1960. Maybe it can help us find out more." Mr. Parker invited Mr. Thompson to his house. There, he showed him the old map. They looked at the town square and found that the large oak tree was marked on the map. Next to it, there was a note, "Site of the annual Pineville Fair." Mr. Parker explained, every summer, there used to be a fair in Pineville. It was a big event with games, food, and music. People from all over the town would come to enjoy it. Maybe this photograph was taken during one of those fairs. Mr. Thompson thought about the fair. He remembered going to it as a child, but he still couldn't remember the boy in the photograph. "Do you think there might be more photographs from the fair?" Mr. Thompson asked. Mr. Parker nodded and said, "I think I have an old box of photos from the fairs. Let's take a look." They searched through the box and found several photographs of the Pineville Fair. There were pictures of people playing games, eating cotton candy, and dancing. But none of the photos showed the boy or the large oak tree. Feeling a little disappointed, Mr. Thompson thanked Mr. Parker and decided to visit the local library. Maybe there, he could find more information. At the library, he met Miss Emily, the librarian. She was a young woman who loved books and helping people. Mr. Thompson showed her the photograph and explained his search. Miss Emily smiled and said, "I love a good mystery. Let's see what we can find in the old newspapers." They looked through the archives of the Pineville Gazette, the town's newspaper. They searched for any articles or pictures from the fairs around 1960. After a while, they found an article dated July 15, 1960. The article talked about the fair and had a small photograph of the event. In the background of the photo, there was the large oak tree, and standing in front of it was the same boy from Mr. Thompson's photograph. Miss Emily read the article out loud. The annual Pineville Fair was a great success. Children enjoyed various games and activities. Here, we see young Timmy Johnson, the winner of the pie-eating contest, standing proudly in front of the old oak tree. Timmy Johnson, Mr. Thompson repeated. The name sounded familiar. I think I knew a Timmy Johnson when I was a child. Miss Emily did some more searching and found an old address book. It had the names and addresses of people who lived in Pineville many years ago. She found Timmy Johnson's name and address. Mr. Thompson decided to visit the address listed in the book. It was a small house on Elm Street. When he arrived, he saw a woman watering the plants in the garden. He approached her and introduced himself. "Hello, my name is George Thompson. I'm looking for Timmy Johnson. Does he live here?" The woman smiled and said, "Timmy Johnson is my father. He moved to a nearby town a few years ago, but he visits often. I can give you his address." Mr. Thompson thanked her and took the address. He wrote a letter to Timmy, explaining about the photograph and his search to find out more about it. A week later, he received a reply. The letter read, "Dear George, I was surprised and happy to receive your letter. The photograph you found brought back many memories. I remember that fair very well. I was so proud to win the pie-eating contest. The photo was taken by my father. I would love to catch up and talk more about those days. Please visit me when you have time. Best regards, Timmy." Mr. Thompson was delighted. He decided to visit Timmy the next day. When he arrived, Timmy welcomed him warmly. They sat in the garden and talked for hours about their childhood and the Pineville Fair. Timmy explained, "The fair was the highlight of our summer. That year, I was determined to win the pie-eating contest. My father took the photo after I won. He was so proud of me." Mr. Thompson smiled and said, "I remember now. You were always the one who could eat the most pies. It's amazing how a simple photograph can bring back so many memories." Timmy nodded and said, "Yes, it's like a piece of the past coming to life. I have some more photos from those days. Would you like to see them?" They looked through Timmy's photo album and found many more pictures of the fairs, the games, and the people of Pineville. Each photo told a story and brought back happy memories. Mr. Thompson and Timmy promised to stay in touch and meet more often. They realized that even though many years had passed, their friendship was still strong. The lost photograph had brought them back together and reminded them of the good times they had shared. And so, In the small town of Pineville, two old friends were reunited, thanks to an old photograph and a little bit of curiosity. The town continued to be quiet and peaceful, but now it was filled with the laughter and stories of the past, remembered and cherished by Mr. Thompson and Timmy Johnson.